Good morning, everyone. The outrage culture is winning, and this story, instead of being about a discussion on the Justice Committee about online hate, has turned into how dare an MP on the Justice Committee quote from the New Zealand Mosques manifesto. It's very strange, and he's been removed from his committee seat because of this. And I think it's the ashamed comment. I think the part where he said, you should be ashamed, I think that's the part that put it over the edge to have him removed from committee. So I think if he hadn't said that, I think he may still be in committee. But this is an interesting twist and turn to this. So we're going to listen to the whole thing. And, well, here we go. CBC News is reporting, quote, Scheer strips Tory MP of committee role after confrontation with Muslim witnesses. Or witness, just one. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has stripped MP Michael Cooper of his spot on the House of Commons Justice Committee as punishment for Cooper's angry confrontation with a Muslim witness in hearings dedicated to online hate. Earlier this week, Cooper told Faisal Khan Suri he should be, quote, ashamed after he drew a link between conservative commentators and the online history of mosque shooter Alexander Bissonnette. Sorry if I've got that wrong. And we'll get to all of the tweets about this in a minute. I think the important part is to understand what happened. And I find it really interesting how they describe this interaction, this conversation. I'm going to read what Mr. Suri said, and then we're going to listen to the whole interaction because it's really important. Here we go. Quote, the evidence from Bissonnette's computers show he repeatedly sought content about anti-immigrant, alt-right, and conservative commentators, mass murderers, U.S. President Donald Trump, and about Muslims, immigrants living in Quebec. Suri said. Okay, so that's the main meat of the point. And Mr. Cooper took great umbrage, I believe is what he said. Yep, great umbrage with that. And went on to talk about how the Christchurch shooter was not a conservative, but instead identified with communist China. That's the only part of the manifesto that he quoted, but these stories are talking about it like he's spreading radicalization and hate, and I find that really interesting. So we're going to listen to the whole thing, the quote and all. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having us. My name is Faisal Khan Suri. I'm the president of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council, AMPAC. Getting the gist of things now. To say it quite mildly, online hate influences real-life hate. To be quite blunt about this, online hate is actually an enabler, a precursor, and a deep contributor to not just real-life hate, but to murder. I think we've seen a lot of recent tragedies that have been happening across the world. In January 2017, in Quebec City, mosque killer Alexander Bissonnette gunned down 6 Muslim men in execution style, where he came into the mosque with 2 guns and fired more than 800 rounds. The evidence from Bissonnette's computer showed he repeatedly sought content about anti-immigrant, alt-right, and conservative commentators, mass murderers, U.S. President Donald Trump, and about the arrival of Muslims, immigrants within Quebec.
Thank you very much, and we'll now move to questions. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Suri, I take great umbrage with your defamatory comments to try to link conservatism with violent and extremist attacks. They have no foundation, they're defamatory, and they diminish your credibility as a witness. And let me, Mr. Chair, read into the record the statement of Brenton Tarrant, who is responsible for the Christchurch massacre. He left a 74-page manifesto in which he stated, conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it. The nation with the closest political and social values to my own is the People's Republic of China, close quote. And I certainly wouldn't attempt to link Bernie Sanders to the individual who shot up Republican members of Congress and nearly fatally killed Congressman Scalise. So you should be ashamed. Now, with respect,
at our committee. I do not. I have this speech in front of me, Mr. Chair, and there's nothing linking conservatism to that movement. If alt-right is limited to conservatism, that's conservatives' issue.
He said conservatism and conservative commentators. Those are his
guys. We're going to ask. We're just going to ask everyone who is not part of the committee to leave the room for a very brief period of time, and we will have you come back in as soon as possible. We apologize for taking away your time. It was important for the committee to discuss and deal with the issue. I'm going to give the floor back to Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I certainly find the comments made by Mr. Surrey to be deeply offensive and objectionable, and vehemently disagree with them, I will withdraw, saying that he should be ashamed. That was not unparliamentary, but I understand it made some other members of the committee uncomfortable. So in the spirit of moving forward, I withdraw those specific comments, but certainly not the rest of what I said.
Okay, so he lost his position on that. Now he remains the deputy justice minister. He remains in his part. I believe that I misspoke there. He's not the deputy justice minister. Hold on, let me double check. Opposition justice critic. There we go. I should make sure that I'm not making people ministers when they're not, right? So opposition justice critic. And so he maintains that position, but he's no longer on the Justice Committee, right? So why? And I thought, what's the problem with this? Why is everybody losing their mind? Could it be because Mr. Surrey was talking about Mr. Bissonnette and not the New Zealand Christchurch shooter, right? Is that why? Maybe because he talked about a different alt-right thing? And, well, I mean, my response to that is they've been conflating the two in the media since Christchurch happened. Every time Christchurch is mentioned, the Quebec mosque shootings are mentioned in a bunch of articles. And I mean, this one came out right when the Christchurch shooting happened. But there are other articles that are tying the two together. When one is mentioned, the other is mentioned, and they talk about Islamophobia and all that other stuff. So I find it interesting. The pearl clutching on this is just so when a witness makes a statement like that and says conservative commentators contribute to murder, right? Contribute to this online hate, contribute to all of this stuff. And then the problem is that our opposition justice critic, who sits on the Justice Committee, used what somebody who is being blamed for alt-right attacks in the same sentence as the Quebec City mosque shootings, used his own words to prove this witness incorrect, and everybody wants to talk about how he quoted the New Zealand Christchurch shooter. They miss the point, the fact that it is to prove that conservatism is not his motivator. In fact, he denounces it. So that's so interesting to me, right? The news can twist things, and we're going to read in Huffington Post how unhinged and angry Mr. Umbridge was. Mr. Cooper was, not Umbridge, sorry. Back to Harry Potter. Mr. Cooper, did he sound unhinged or really particularly angry to you? He sounded very, very even to me. Like, it's very interesting watching all of these parries and blows, right? Like, this is news as a weapon. This is information warfare. This is interesting to watch. Pay attention. Here's Andrew Scheer saying, quote, this is on Twitter, I have spoken with Michael Cooper about comments he made at the Justice Committee earlier this week. Having taken the time to review the incident, I have informed him that he will no longer sit on the Justice Committee as a consequence. Reading the name and quoting the words of the Christchurch shooter, especially when directed at a Muslim witness during a parliamentary hearing, is insensitive and unacceptable. Mr. Cooper has apologized. I accept his apology, and I consider this matter closed. And it's never enough. They're still calling for his head, calling for him to resign, calling for Mr. Scheer to eject him from caucus, etc., and I'll show you that as well. But so interesting, right? Here's Mr. Cooper's statement, read my statement, and an apology for my comments at the Justice Committee earlier this week. Earlier this week, at the Justice Committee, I interpreted comments made by witness Faisal Khan Suri as likening mainstream conservatism with violent extremism. In response, I quoted the words of a white supremacist anti-Muslim mass murderer in an ill-advised attempt to demonstrate that such acts are not linked to conservatism. I absolutely should not have quoted these words, nor named the perpetrator. This was a mistake. I apologize to Mr. Surrey and to all Canadians. I reiterate that I unequivocally condemn all forms of racism. I've spoken to my leader, Andrew Scheer, and we have agreed that I will no longer sit on the Justice Committee. Is it racist to say, sir, you're wrong, and here's the proof that you're wrong, and I'm going to read it in this person's own words? Is that racist? Should the Justice Committee not be able to have that conversation and be able to not degenerate into a pearl clutching in camera, hello everyone, please leave for a few minutes while we figure this out? mess? I demand more from my government. I demand adults able to look at facts like the New Zealand Christchurch shooter denounced conservatism in his manifesto. Here it is. That's proof. Period. Here's Huffington Post. Oh, I wanted to show you that they want more. Yeah. Your behavior, this is responses to Mr. Cooper's apology. Your behavior is disturbing and disgraceful, especially coming from Canadian Parliament. Resign. And I've gone through these. There's a bunch of other, people calling for his resignation, people calling for him to move over to the People's Party. There are people saying supportive things and saying like you did nothing wrong. I chimed in as well. You can have a look at what I said. And I mean, there are people posting memes, right? Here's Joe. He says he doesn't believe him. Yeah. Okay. Well, right. Resign. There's Colbert. So the response is mixed. Mr. Scheer did what he felt was appropriate. Here's Spencer Fernando's response as well. He thinks that this is pretty on par with pretty fair, right? He says that Michael Cooper gets to keep his opposition critic position of the justice, right? But he doesn't get to stay on the Justice Committee. So, I mean, right? Fair. I don't know if it's fair. I think that I think the facts should reign. I think that you should be able to say, yes, this happened, and it's not appropriate to draw these lines. It's not appropriate because we're studying online hate, and what we have to say here will affect all Canadians. And if what we're hearing is false, and it was provably false, it should be called out. And people who call it out shouldn't be punished. This is ridiculous. Here's the Huffington Post saying Scheer should boot MP Michael Cooper for quoting terrorist manifesto. Witness. This is insane. A Muslim anti-racism activist who was berated by Conservative MP last week says Andrew Scheer's response is far from adequate and that Michael Cooper should be booted out of caucus if the Tory leader is serious about showing racists the door. See? More. Even the paper. Boot him out of caucus. It's not enough. Get him gone. Back to the article. Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council President Faisal Khan Suri told HuffPost Canada that while he hasn't seen Cooper demonstrate any racism, he believes the way the St. Albert Edmonton MP behaved, quote, seemed that he had a very bigoted and extremist viewpoint. Really, Mr. Suri? I'd like you to explain that. Quote, I would request Andrew, and this is back to Mr. Suri, I would request Andrew Scheer to make the right move and to actually have Mr. Cooper removed from caucus. It is detrimental to have such leaders part of any party and part of Parliament. It is dangerous to have such a person there, he said in a phone interview Saturday night. It's dangerous to have somebody with the wherewithal to call you out, Mr. Faisal or Mr. Suri, on your misspeaking to our Justice Committee, on your direct line tying to white supremacy, alt-right extremism, and conservative commentators. And he said, hold on a second, no. This white supremacist specifically denounced conservative commentators, and that's somehow wrong? What in the world? And this is Joe. Joe does a YouTube show, and he was very supportive of me when I was starting, and I think his show's pretty good too. He does a lot of driving and looking in the camera. But he says, quote, he's tweeting out, this is why it will be impossible for conservatives to win this election. Liberals installed a weak CPC leader specifically so they could bully him and his caucus into submission. What a pathetic display of conservatism, terrified of being called a bad name, Andrew Scheer. And man, that kind of describes it. It seems like a very strange thing to do when, in the context of all of this, we're focusing on the fact that he read some words from a manifesto and not on the fact that those words disprove what this witness said to the Justice Committee. That should matter. It should matter a lot. And apparently in Mr. Scheer's Canada and Mr. Scheer's Conservative Party, what matters more is what the newspapers will say. But Mr. Scheer, here's the thing, they're going to say it anyway, right? They're going to say it anyway. They're trying to paint you as a racist. They're trying to paint everyone who isn't NDP, Green, or Liberal a racist and a bigot and an extremist. And it's not true. And at some point, you have to stand up and say the facts don't bear out what you're saying. And if you, Andrew Scheer, keep punishing your MPs for doing that, well, I think you're going to be sorely, sorely disappointed in October. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful Sunday.